Senator Staines, on your bill.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. So this, I think, folks know, I first came to this issue on whether or not we should be looking at taxing and regulating adult use cannabis sitting in this room, exec committee, over 5 years ago when we were debating whether we should do medical cannabis or not. And some members on the committee themselves were both bipartisan, suggesting whether or not we should actually be looking at taxing and regulating. And as I was studying whether or not I thought we should go down the medical path, I very much came to the conclusion that we should be looking at taxing and regulating for a whole bunch of reasons. Primarily, that prohibition just simply does not work in my view. We have in Illinois about 800,000 people who report that they use it regularly. Now under the medical program, we have around 55,000 people who have medical cards, which means that 95% are purchasing on the illicit market. So they're not getting a safe product. We don't know what they're getting. We hear stories of rat poisoning from Peoria, where people had died last summer because of rat poisoning being included and cut into the cannabis, fentanyl being regularly added. We just don't know what you're buying when you're buying it on the street. We also understand that teens have easy access right now, that prohibition is not preventing teens from getting access to it. Think that by getting in the middle of this and having government help regulate and take this on a public health approach, we can give better information to teens and try to actually reduce use, like we've seen happen with drinking and driving and tobacco use. And finally, it's been a very unjust system. We know that cannabis use amongst various racial and ethnic groups is very similar, yet historically the impact on the criminal justice system with arrests and incarceration around cannabis issues themselves are 7 to 1 times more likely to impact people who are brown or black. Very unjust system historically. So I very much came to we should be going down this route. Representative Cassidy and I, over 2 years ago, first introduced a bill to tax and regulate. So in March of 2017. So over 2 years now, we've been holding town halls across the state. We've had public hearings on this issue. We've had hundreds of meetings with stakeholders. We had, with the governor's office at the helm, 6 working groups on the various topics that are addressed in this bill. Been a very collaborative effort. You have up here today that you'll also be hearing from Senator Hutchinson and Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell, but there's been many senators and representatives involved with us from the get-go. Throughout all of the work we've been doing, there's been 3 real themes that have arisen on why we should be doing this. We want public safety, particularly for our kids. We want social justice, and we want, by getting our policy right, additional revenue for the state. We think Senate Bill 7 works really hard to balance these goals. I'm going to provide the overview of this bill, most of the details of what's in it. Senator Hutchinson then will go into further details around the social equity and taxation elements, and Deputy Governor Mitchell will highlight some of the administrative objectives and how they came about their views on this bill. We are doing this legislatively. Most states that have legalized, we have 10 states that have done it through referendum. Only Vermont has not. We have a big advantage doing it legislatively to get the policy right. We can build on the model program that's our medical program, where we don't have much diversion out of that by all reports. It's been a model. People come to try to see how they can do it in the same way here. Possession, the way that we're structuring this now is really building on that. The possession limit under this bill for people 21 years and older, starting in January 1st of 2020, will be 30 grams for Illinois residents, 15 grams for non-Illinois residents who are 21 years and older. A household can grow up to 5 plants. For personal use only. Those 5 plants must be in a separately locked room away from household members who are under 21, and they cannot be in public view. Public consumption of cannabis and driving while under the influence of cannabis remains illegal under this bill, is now, will remain so. Municipalities and local jurisdictions will have the ability to opt out of any cannabis businesses locating in their jurisdictions if they choose to. If they want to have them in their business, in their jurisdictions, they can control, they can maintain their own zoning ordinances about where they can be located. With the one exception, we don't want to have the issue of having dispensaries, which we've learned from other states. dispensaries too close to each other, so there is a restriction that we have in the bill that they can't locate within 1,500 square feet of each other. We also want to make sure that employers have the ability to maintain zero tolerance drug policies. Building owners do not have to allow cannabis in their buildings that they own. They can still keep zero tolerance policies in place. A number of the elements in this bill, too, are designed towards addressing public health and safety concerns that we heard a lot about. We had one of our working groups was solely on this issue, and we got a lot of input from folks in the public's health arena. We want to ensure a safe product. We'll continue to build on the medical cannabis program, seed to sale tracking program, where you have barcodes. You know exactly where product has gone at every step of the way. You know what's in it. You know a used by date. You know exactly what the THC content is. And you know that it's got no pesticides or any other contaminants or any other products in it. No advertising will be allowed near any places where kids congregate. And it cannot be geared, there can be no advertising that's geared to appeal to minors, including anything like cartoons or toys, animals, children's characters or phrases that are popular to kids, or anything that imitates candy packaging or is designed to appeal to youth. Packaging must be sealed, labeled containers that's child resistant, and includes specific warning labels about why it's not good for that it's only for adult use, and that it's not good for breastfeeding or pregnant or women. We will also be able to regulate and limit how much THC can be in an entire package of a good or a single serving dose. There's also going to be a public education campaign before the start date for this bill, and the bill creates the Public Health Advisory Committee to provide ongoing input on public education and health issues around this issue. And finally, some of the revenue that will be generated from the sales of the product will support ongoing public education and community mental health and substance abuse prevention and treatment programming. Regarding driving under the influence, right now under state law, when we did the decriminalization bill of cannabis for 10 grams or less of the product, we set a standard in place for what driving under the influence is. It is 10 nanograms per milliliter of THC in the blood, 5 nanograms per milliliter of other fluids like saliva. It provides right now in the bill where we're providing that a person who's driving has to consent to validated roadside testing or standardized field sobriety testing, with refusal resulting in a 12-month suspension of driving privileges. Person under 21 with cannabis in possession, we're now trying to equalize that so it's treated like alcohol, so that if somebody under 21 is found possessing cannabis, they can have their driving privileges revoked, suspended as well. And again, we are also ensuring that some of the revenue from the bill goes to support law enforcement efforts so that they can do more training for drug recognition experts, do more to help purchase now roadside tests that are now becoming available, and those kinds of initiatives that local law enforcement need to help shore up their enforcement issues. Licensing, I'm going to touch on this briefly. Under the current medical program, we have cultivation centers. We have 21 of them are allowed to be licensed. 21 of those are issued, 20 of those are issued right now, and we have dispensaries. We're adding additional licensing categories under this bill. We have a new craft grow license now available, considered under this bill for a smaller footprint that can be located more flexibly, like in a manufacturing district in an urban area, if desired by the municipality. We're adding a processing license so that somebody can get the extracted product and make it into some other form that they would like to try to sell. And we're adding a transporter's license. These are all geared, and Senator Hutchinson will get into more details around it, about creating more opportunities and diversity of entry into the business. And we want to make sure we have more small business development going along with this bill, not just the large players that we have currently. There's it's done by waves under which we see rolling out the new program. Current dispensaries can apply for the adult use approval within 60 days after the effective date. Current dispensaries can apply for a second site location as well. so that we'd have right now we have 55 dispensaries, so we'd have 110, up to 110 available by the time the program goes live in January of 2020. Current cultivation centers can apply to grow for adult use. And then in wave 2, we open it up to additional dispensaries and cultivation centers. Our philosophy and approach on this is managed growth. We've learned from other states that if you don't do it in a controlled fashion, you can have overproduction and stuff diverts into the illegal market. We have seen that happening where things get picked up from places like Oregon and Washington, and we want to make sure we only do additional growth based on sort of market demand. So we are also building in the need to do market demand before you issue more cultivation dispensary licenses down the road, so that we are ensuring that we're not having an oversupply that might get diverted. Regulatory oversight, again, we have a good, strong model program here under the medical program, so we're leaving that basically intact, where Department of Agriculture would regulate the cultivation centers, the craft grow and the processing licenses. Department of Financial and Professional Regulation will oversee the dispensary licenses. The state police will continue to do the background checks and review all security plans. And that you have, like Department of Revenue, collecting the revenue on it. We are adding, so we make sure we coordinate across all the agencies. The governor would appoint a chief cannabis officer within the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. There's also been a strong view that we've had on this bill towards social equity, and we view it sort of as a three-legged stool. Three parts to trying to achieve some social equity in this is one, expungement. As I said up front, we've had a history here where there's a lot of over-incarceration and impact in the criminal justice system in certain communities. We want to make sure that we are enabling an expungement of those records. So misdemeanors and class 4 felonies are expungible through a process that makes it as easy as we can for those individuals and without fees involved as well, because that can be very daunting. Second aspect of this is that we are really wanting to diversify the industry with social equity applicants. As I say, we're going to have new licensing categories, and we're creating a social equity applicant base from those areas that are considered to be disproportionately impact areas. So areas that have high poverty and high rates of arrest, conviction, and incarceration that's related to cannabis. And the third leg of the stool then is having a portion of the revenue go towards communities that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs through a program called Restoring Our Communities. In a moment, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hutchinson, who will get into more details of some of those aspects. The revenue estimates that we have on the bill are that ultimately, when it's fully mature, we'll have about $500 million that we're receiving from sales. But that's not likely to reach that point for at least 5 or 6 years or so, is what we've seen in other states to get to sort of maturity, meaning that people are really have been moving off of the illicit market into the now legal market. In Colorado, for example, they've now reduced their illegal market by about 75%. That's our goal here. Revenue estimates for next year, as we're just getting this up and running, for fiscal year 2020 is about $56 million or $57 million, growing to an estimate of about $140 million in fiscal year 21. The way we're allocating the revenues that's presented in the bill are 35% to the general revenue fund, 10% to unpaid bills, 25% to the Restoring Our Community program to help neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted and hurt by the war on drugs, 20% to community mental health and substance abuse treatment programs, 8% to law enforcement, and 2% to public education. On that, I'm going to turn it over to Senator Hutchinson to give a little more details on the taxation itself and the social equity pieces.
Mr. Clerk, please add Senator Harmon to the roll. Senator Hutchinson.
Thank you, members of the committee. As you can see, there's been a lot of work that's gone into this bill. I came to this because I understood in my national role as president of the National Conference of State Legislatures, watching the other 33 states that have medical programs and the 10 states that run those adult use programs simultaneously or concurrently. They run side by side. One of the things that was the first major lesson that you see across those states is that when you get the taxation policy correct, you then can make very significant inroads into the illicit market. This is almost a guiding principle for us, and it also goes into the reality of the fact that we didn't come to this from a revenue framework first. We wanted to come to this from a responsible policy framework first. And if the emphasis was on public health and on some elements of criminal justice reform, that another way to do that was to make sure that all of the conversations wasn't just about how much money we could make. That this is significant and important for us to get the policy right on this, as we are facing the fact that the industry is here and is growing, and it's growing rapidly across the country. There is nobody in this room that can stop the growth of the cannabis industry. So what we need to do is regulate it so we can protect vulnerable populations, so that we can figure out how to learn from the mistakes of other states, and hopefully be in a situation where we create a piece of legislation that's model as other states come online and do this, because we know that that is a foregone conclusion, especially with the legalization of the entire country of Canada and Michigan right next door. So one of the things that this does create, because another guiding principle of this was, you cannot legalize or provide an ability for an industry to make millions of dollars while you have folks simultaneously sitting and handling the repercussions of the prohibition on this very same activity that sometimes can have lifelong impacts that have absolutely destroyed communities. So Senate Bill 7 creates a social equity program that will help to promote minority involvement in the cannabis industry. Social equity participants will have access to grants and loans in order to deter some of the upfront costs of participating in the adult use cannabis market. Social equity applicants will also receive additional points in the licensing selection process. The applicants may have 50% of the non-refundable application fees waived on a maximum of 2 of each of the individual social equity applicant applications. When we talk about the Restoring Our Communities program, which is a performance incentive funding program for high-need, underserved communities throughout the state, the ROC Board, the Reinvesting in Our Communities Board, shall provide planning and implementation grants as well as technical assistance to collaborative groups. ROC program grants will go to disproportionately impacted areas as defined in this bill. Senator Staines mentioned briefly the taxes that will level on this. One of the things I wanted to point out too, that retail taxes are as follows, and this is point of sale. Cannabis excise tax between 10 and 25%. Cannabis, just the flower, at or above 35%. THC, 10%. All cannabis-infused products at 20%. Any cannabis other than cannabis-infused products above 35% or THC, 25%. Unit of local government purchaser excise tax no more than 3.5%. State sales tax at 6.25%. So the retail taxes levied are about 19.55% to 34.75%. The way the model is for the level of THC in each of the products and the differentiation between cannabis-infused products and the actual flower is similar to the way we tax for gradations of alcohol in our beer, wine, and liquor, different kinds of excise taxes and taxes for alcohol content on there. It's very similar to that. And again, the goal is to not tax so high that people do not turn to the legal market where it would be highly regulated and stay in the illicit market. That has corresponding relations, that has a corresponding relationship to our ability to reduce crime and our ability to at least provide this modicum of safety for people knowing exactly what they're getting, and that standardization processes, marketing processes, packaging, and all those things that go into being able to keep this consistent and safe for people who are consuming it are at top of mind in this at all times. Senate Bill 7 also allocates tax revenue in this order. Number 1, agency administrative costs, the costs incurred from the expungement process. After the above two have been paid, the remaining amount will be broken out as follows. The 2% for education safety campaigns, 8% for law enforcement grants for prevention and training, the 25% for ROC programs, 20% for programs that address substance abuse and mental health prevention and treatment, the 10% for bill backlog, and 35% to the general revenue fund. I wanted to point out also that some of these things will have overlap, especially when you're directing resources to high-need communities on things like education and safety and substance abuse and mental health things. Those things are desperately needed in incomes that have been disproportionately impacted by this, and we were very thoughtful and deliberative as trying to figure out where the revenue allocation should go from a policy standpoint as well as for the fiscal health of the state, knowing that from a policy standpoint, the revenue as it grows is something that we need to be watchful for, but not if we don't get the policy right on the front end. And with that, I'll turn that over to Deputy Governor Christian Mitchell.
Mr. Clerk, please add Senator Munoz to the roll. Deputy Governor, thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Spokesperson Ryder and members of the committee. And thank you, of course, to Heather Staines, our sponsor, and to Senator Hutchinson for all that they've done to get us to this place. So I'm going to be brief. I'm going to do all that I can not to repeat things that were said before me, but I want to lay out the principles that were important for the governor's office in helping to put together this piece of legislation. And primarily the governor's office was guided by three principles when it came to legalizing the adult use of recreational cannabis, and those were safety, equity, and justice. You've heard a lot of talk about the medical program today. I want to talk about a thing that it did very well and a thing that didn't do so well, and use that as a way to discuss how we looked at this. Our medical cannabis program is among the safest in the country. Our state agencies do regular inspections. Medical products, as Senator Staines mentioned, are tracked using a sophisticated seed-to-sale monitoring system, and laboratories can make sure that patients are receiving products that are safe for human consumption. We wanted to build upon that, and that's why over the course of the last few months, we held more than a dozen stakeholder meetings, I think over 20, including one subset focused exclusively on public health and awareness. And as a result of those efforts, this proposal requires warning labels on packaging for all cannabis products and imposes advertising restrictions to prevent marketing to youth. But there was a thing that the medical program didn't do so well, and it's one that we wanted to focus on. And it was that the state did not prioritize equity and did not ensure that those communities disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs got the opportunity at ownership and self-determination that they deserved. So a vital component and a primary component for the governor's office is the promotion of social equity in this new industry. And we work with the bill sponsors and with other caucuses to create a framework to establish this industry, and we chose to lead deliberately with social equity rather than with revenue. Senator Hutchinson went over some of this already. I'll just pull out a few of the highlights, which are we have a scoring system in this bill that allocates significant points to social equity applicants. There's a roughly $20 million low-interest loan fund established to help those social equity applicants, because in talking to disproportionately impacted entrepreneurs across the country, they said consistently that access to capital was a real challenge. So combining that with not needing to have real estate up front for a dispensary is going to be a way to really lower barriers to entry. And we also established limitations on ownership to make sure that market share is not crowded out for new entrepreneurs. We emphasize this up front. Senator Staines said it as well. The fact that we are rolling this out slowly, that there is controlled growth in this market, is incredibly important for equity, because if we're not doing it right, we have a chance to course correct. But it also means that we have built-in stopping points for the program, so that if there's anything else on the program that we need to do better, we will have natural stepping off points to figure out what it is we need to do to improve the program. To conduct a disparity study according to the bill to make sure that what we're doing on equity is working, and if not, that we have the backup and the evidence to take any additional measures that might make sense. It is also imperative that we pursue justice in this proposal. As we end an era of prohibition and the overcriminalization of cannabis, this proposal lays out a framework that will automatically expunge the criminal records of individuals who were arrested, convicted, were on supervision or probation for misdemeanor or class 4 felony violation of the Cannabis Control Act. The goal here was to create a streamlined program that works for individuals, for law enforcement, prosecutors, and for the courts. And what's key here is that only individuals with standalone offenses would be eligible under this automatic process. If you have a conviction or arrest associated, another conviction or arrest associated with your cannabis offense, you would be eligible to petition the court on your own. I know this provision and other provisions in the bill are somewhat controversial. We are proud of this proposal, but we are quite clear, I think all of us here, that changes will need to be made. We look forward to hearing from this committee, from other stakeholders, whether it's here or in writing, what those changes are. We look forward to working with all parties in a bipartisan fashion, with all groups that are affected, to do all that we can to make this proposal as best it possibly can be. And what I believe folks will also see reflected is that opponents have already made this bill better than it initially was. So with that, I will just say thank you, and I'm sure we're all happy to take questions.
Senator Ryder for a line of questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I do want to start first by thanking Senator Staines. I don't know in my 22 years that I can think of another legislative proposal which has been more the subject of long and statewide public information gathering hearings, and that was driven by you, and so I want to thank you for that. I think that you are no one, I mean, regardless of where people come down on this issue, no one can question, I think, the sincerity of your words when you say you want to hear from people about this. And so thank you for that, because not everyone's like that, and I want to thank you for that. Also, my thanks to the chair, because he understands the need for us to ask questions about this and gather information. That's what the committee process is for. He's respecting that. I appreciate that very much, Mr. Chairman. Also, thank you for not allowing Senator Oberweis leave to take pictures. I'm going to start with you, Deputy Governor. You made a comment in your testimony that this bill builds upon the medical marijuana statute. And I want to ask you about that, because I think I didn't support the medical marijuana bill, but one of the things that I've been impressed by with that is that the production and distribution means has been tightly controlled. So the promises that were made to people that when you go to a dispensary, you're going to know exactly what you're buying in terms of potency. That's government regulated, and so those promises have been kept true. The bill that's before us has a home grow component, which, while limiting home grow individuals to 5 plants by law, nevertheless doesn't have any regulation mechanism for potency issues. So my question is this with regards to medical marijuana. Aren't we now walking into a situation where someone who has a prescription for medical marijuana and is taking a specified dose that's been directed by a doctor, and they are going to dispensary and getting exactly that dosage because that's what's on the prescription, can now say, I'm going to grow it on my own, and I'm just going to smoke whatever I want to smoke or take however I want to take? I mean, what about that person?
So I'm not totally sure I understand your question, Senator. I think because where you sort of started was when you go to a dispensary, you get a guaranteed product. So what is homegrown would not go out to a dispensary. That is, would only be for personal
Correct.
use. In theory, I don't believe there is a potency limit in the bill for what someone could do on home grow. I think that the home grow provision is probably one that's going to change relatively substantially. It's one that we hear a lot from law enforcement and from legislators on. I think that's an interesting observation. If there's something we can do on that, I think we would be very interested in hearing a suggestion.
I want to just add to that, though, because there's only so much potency you can get in a plant. The higher potency can come when you infuse and make other products. It can only go to about 35% in a plant. Right now, the plant just can't get more potent than that, is my understanding. I'm not a scientist, don't want to, I can't get into the detail, but I do know that that's the case. There's only so much potency you can get in a plant. That all said, it's a very different model. I mean, doing home grow. We have heard a lot and getting a lot of feedback about concerns on that, particularly from law enforcement. We understand. We've tried to learn things from other states in the way that they've gone about home grow. Michigan right now is 12 plants that they're allowing. Colorado had a much higher number of plants when they originally started the program than they do now. They've scaled back. They also originally allowed a caretaker to grow the plant for you. So while you might only be able to be allowed to grow 5, Heather, could be the caretaker for a whole bunch of you and grow a whole warehouse full. This is very small, very limited, just to the 5 plants per household. And that said, we're still open to input and changing the way we're going about that and potentially narrowing it, because we are getting that feedback.
Okay. I need to keep my commitment to the chairman that I'm going to keep my questions concise, and I'm going to ask that the answers be the same. So, Senator Staines, would you agree that if this became law, people who now have a prescription for medical marijuana would be able to grow their plants at home and use those and lose the potential safety benefit of the government regulation that was talked a lot about when that bill passed?
So first of all, it's important to understand they're not getting a prescription for marijuana. What's happening right now in the medical program is you have a diagnosis that under which you're enabled to. So there's no prescription. So there's no precise kind of product that they're getting a prescription for. So that's just not the way it works. I would acknowledge that obviously when you're home growing something in your own home, that there's a difference than going to a dispensary and knowing exactly what you're getting. I don't think the numbers are likely to be high. I think it's a hard thing to do. We've certainly seen the numbers of people who have been arrested for home grow has been dropping precipitously. I have the numbers. I can get that to you. And since we did go to medical, they've dropped even more. But your point stands that, it's not regulated in the same way, and that's one of the reasons why we think we should be going and exactly taxing and regulating, because it's a safe product.
Thank you. Okay, I've got just 3 areas that I want to kind of work through with you, Senator Staines, and Senator Hutchinson. Mr. Mitchell can chime in as you deem appropriate. First area I want to talk about is expungement. Now, I understand that there are those who can make the argument that there is some symmetry, if you will, between expunging the criminal records of those who've been convicted of something that is now legal. Now, I don't know that we do that hardly any other area of policy, but at least you can make the argument that if you're going to expunge the criminal records for people who were convicted of that which is now being made legal, there's some symmetry there. Where I'm struggling, and I think others have, and you referenced it, Mr. Mitchell, in your testimony, is the notion that we are going to expunge records for people who are engaging in what will still be illegal conduct that reaches into the felony realm. And what we're talking about is delivery, possession with intent to deliver or manufacture between 10 and 30 grams, or possession up to 500 grams, the latter of which is 16 and a half times what will be legal for possession under this bill. I have some questions about that expungement provision, and I'm going to ask you to talk to me about why we're doing that. First of all, are there any limits in the bill going forward about how long that expungement can last? In other words, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, as the bill is currently drafted, would those expungements still be available? Is there any limit, sunset, on those expungement provisions?
You can start.
Okay, I'm going to, because this is an area that Deputy Governor Mitchell has done a lot more of the work on, so I'm going to turn the questioning over to him, but you directed it at me, so let me first start. I just want to first state, one of the things we're doing under the bill now is obviously legalizing possession up to the 30 grams, but we're also legalizing distribution of much larger quantities of that through the dispensaries. So I understand the point on that, and we are very open to looking at that and working with folks. We've been hearing. Definitely an area of feedback is what we should allow under the expungible category, and we are very much looking forward to input on that. We know we're likely to make changes to that. But I'm going to turn it over to Deputy Governor Mitchell to ask that specific questions about the length of the expungement.
So the question is there a sunset on the felony expungements?
So what I'd say 2 things about this. So one is, and Heather noted this up front, Senator, is the feeling here is that what you are effectively doing is you are legalizing a market, and you're legalizing sort of en masse the ability to manufacture with the intent to deliver to a customer large amounts of cannabis. And the idea that you would have people suffer consequences for conduct that is going to be legal if they're participating in the new market is potentially problematic. Now, that said, Senator, as we've alluded to several times here, we've heard criticism of this provision. We know there's concerns for law enforcement for how it gets enforced and how the process works. We are happy to consider amendments to that process. To your question about how would expungement be available in the future, I think the idea here is that those who are convicted of these offenses should not suffer the lifelong consequences of having this criminal record, that we want to look forward to future offenses. But that said, on this provision very specifically for future offenses, there has been substantial conversations with States Attorneys Associations and others. We are looking to see if there is a way we can come to some compromise on this.
Okay. There's not a sunset in the bill right now for expungements, correct?
No.
Okay. Is there, and I'm gonna before I ask this next question, I want you to know, message received, that you are telling me that you are open potentially to changes on this provision. So I've got that. So again, to be respectful to time and other members, let's just walk through these. Is there any limit in the bill with regards to how many times a specific individual could avail themselves of the expungement? I know there is a twice per year review required, but a specific individual? Is there a limit on how many times they could have a felony that falls within this, in the statute, expunged?
I don't believe so, but again, Senator, remember, some of the stuff is stuff that we're making legal, so they wouldn't be committing the same offense over and over again because it wouldn't be an offense anymore, if I'm understanding your question correctly.
The felony offense is not going to be made legal.
I see what you're saying. Okay,
yes.
understood.
So,
no,
I was referring specifically to the felony
felonies.
offenses.
Apologies, I misunderstood the question. So currently the answer is no.
Okay. Is there any limitation with regards to the individual's criminal record otherwise?
The bill is silent on that. So you're saying, so there's no
qualifiers in it.
As in, if you have another category of offense, you would not be eligible for expungement for this cannabis.
Another felony, another set of felonies. No. Okay. Is there anything in the bill about situations, and these happen all the time, as I know you're aware, where someone is charged with a Class 2, Class 1, Class X felony, and then as a result of plea negotiations, it is settled upon a plea of guilty to a Class 4 felony. So is there anything in the bill about the circumstances surrounding the conviction?
No, Senator, there isn't. And I'm not, frankly, in a retrospective way, I'm not sure there's a lot that we can do about this. We would obviously expect that this would probably change charging and plea negotiation behavior of state's attorneys going forward. That would be up to them.
Okay. Staying on the expungement, I'm almost done with this area. As you know, in order to obtain a firearm owner's identification card, one of the questions has to do with a felony record. So an individual, if this becomes law, who has a Class 4 felony conviction right now that is expungible under this bill, has that felony expunged, and then applies for a FOID card, what am I or any other legislator to tell their constituent about marking that yes or no?
I'm sorry, marking the
question
last
on the
part
FOID card application about whether or not you've ever been convicted of a felony.
So the answer, as I understand it, Senator, is that has been expunged, which would also deal with the underlying fact of conviction. This came up in another meeting, so this is an issue that we are now looking at. So I believe the answer is that would be no.
So
that's my understanding. We'll double check that.
Okay, so you're going to double check, but so your answer is that you believe that they would be, if they were otherwise eligible, their prior conviction that had been expunged would not be a barrier to obtaining a FOID card.
At present, I believe the answer to that question is yes.
Okay.
I want to just also, one thing, because you had mentioned before about if you had other charges associated with it, I do want to note that it's not automatic if you have multiple charges, that you have to go and petition the court, just for clarification.
And thank you for the clarification.
So there's no qualification on which charges, but if
Okay.
there are multiple charges, you have to petition, so I misspoke.
Last question on this has to do with federally licensed firearm dealers. So an FFL application, I believe, also has the question about being convicted of a felon. Now we're talking about a license to sell firearms. Would you give me the same answer there, that since the person's record has been expunged, that if they were otherwise eligible for an FFL, they will be able to mark that no and be eligible?
So I'm going to emphasize here, Senator, that I'm working on it, but not yet a member of the Illinois Bar. So I'm going to give you my understanding of this, and we will make sure. Not yet, another semester if I survive. My understanding is that there is a question as it relates to case law on this, as to the difference between expungement or a gubernatorial pardon in terms of the underlying fact of conviction for federal purposes. I believe there's some dispute on that. I don't. So the short answer is I'm not quite sure what the answer to that question is. We will find out, and we will get you an answer to it.
Fair enough. Let's move on to revenue. You gave us a projection of $500 million. Senator, I appreciate your honesty that that's a 5 or 6 year ramp up. Can you, actually, you walked me through the percentages of where the money goes, but it's my understanding that the first payer, or the first cut of that money, will go to the agencies that are charged with the regulation of the system. Is that accurate?
Yeah, and that will mostly come out of fees. So this revenue was relating, that I gave you on the estimates, I should have clarified that, I apologize, is relating to the sales. What we'll get from the excise tax that's put on at point of sales, and we also have licensing fees. In addition to that, and most of the licensing fees are going to be doing two things right up front. At the initial onset, they go to help seed the Cannabis Business Development Fund, and they'll also be going towards the regulatory cost of the program. If there is more cost to the program than what's covered by the fees, first and foremost, out of those revenues would be sufficient to fund any other administrative costs that we do have. We want to make sure those costs are covered first. But we think that the regulatory fees will, the application fees, the license fees will primarily cover the costs of the regulatory side.
Cover the cost of administering the program. So is the 500 million figure a revenue sales figure, or is that inclusive of the fee income to which you're
That's
referring?
just sales. Our first year figure, though, of the 56, it includes both, but the 500 million down the road has been done just based on
Okay.
the
Got it.
sales,
Now-
not fees.
Because you are an extraordinarily cunning and wise budgeteer, you know that the governor's introduced budget has a number of what we would call placeholder appropriations in it for different agencies in anticipation of this bill becoming law and them needing appropriations in order to do that. And my list, and maybe it's not complete, has 8 million going to the Department of Agriculture. I saw the director in here earlier. I'm sure he's pleased with that. 2 million going to the Department of Financial and Professional Regulation. 500,000 going to the Department of Public Health, and 2 million going to the Illinois State Police. Now that's a total of $12.5 million. Is that I think I asked the departments when they testified before our committee, Senator, what those numbers were based on. To their credit, they were like, we don't know, we're just kind of putting a number in there. And they didn't know. So do you have a view on the accuracy, potential accuracy of the numbers that I just read off now as opposed to what we had a couple months ago?
I know the administration has been asking all the agencies for their detailed cost estimates now. I don't know if the deputy governor has those with them now, but we've been going through that exercise to ensure that if we pass this, we build in the right amount into the appropriation, and he may have the data with him.
Yeah, so these are approximate estimates, Senator, but for DPH, it's about 579,000. For DOR, it's about 3.5 million roughly. Same for, DFPR is about 3 million. ISP around 6 million. DCO about 565,000. And then we've got ballpark numbers for DHS and ICEJA of each about 1.5 million for various functions they'd be taking on. It's roughly what we estimate. And that's new staff, programmatic expertise, et cetera. I actually don't have that.
Okay, so I just did that very quickly, and that's somewhere around 17 or 18 million dollars.
That sounds right.
Okay. Now, in Colorado, according to their numbers, it's about 15 million. That's my understanding. Colorado is about a third of the population of Illinois. Now, if you time, and I get it, this is like cocktail napkin math, but that's 45 million, which is a big difference between the what now you have and 45 million. Yep. I mean, how confident are you about those numbers?
So their market is a lot larger. So you'll note, Senator, that we talked up front a lot about the slow and controlled growth that we're doing here. So our market's just going to start a lot smaller. That number may grow, but obviously it will be growing at the same time. This pretty exponential growth on sales revenue is happening, so I don't think that's going to be a problem for us.
Okay. All right. Senator, you referenced in your testimony on that you filed a bill 2 years ago on this. The percentages allocation of where money was going were significantly different in that bill than they are in this one. The numbers, particularly for education and law enforcement, are down a great deal from what they were 2 years ago. Can you walk me through your thinking, because we're talking about the allocation of the resources, of why those numbers changed so significantly?
So I honestly can't even remember what they were in the bill 2 years ago, because we've been working on this bill for 2 years. So it really has come, we've had, hundreds and hundreds of stakeholder meetings, and town halls and meetings with legislative working groups. So this has been a very long process. And there's been a lot of input into, in terms of what the priorities are and how we want to do this. So clearly there's a goal towards restorative justice aspects, social justice that we think is important. Thus, we needed to include dollars for the Restoring Our Community way of helping neighborhoods that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. We understand when you do this that we want to make sure that law enforcement has tools available, so we definitely want to leave dollars in there for law enforcement. We know that over the last decades, really, we've been decimating our community mental health and substance abuse treatment programs. We felt it was important to be able to have some of the dollars going towards that. And then clearly, we also want to, have some assistance for the general revenue fund in paying off the backlog of bills. So, and again, this is an area that may make more changes as we go, but, there's been a lot of involvement in determining how this should be.
You'll get another shot at answering that question later, Senator. My recollection is 2 years ago, there was 30% set aside for education and 25% for law enforcement. Those numbers, relatively speaking, are 2% and 8% now. But let's close out that.
That education was going out to schools, not public education. I don't think there had been any allocation for public education around the issue. That was very different.
Is there any money going out to schools under your bill, the present bill?
No. We have the new evidence-based funding formula, and that's really been driving a lot of new resources to the schools.
They love it when we say, you know what, we're giving them plenty of money already. Last area that I want to ask about, and I'm going to put this out here. I don't want to we shouldn't have a debate on it. I'm not going to make an argument. There's a media report out there about someone who is being, let's say, aggressive in pursuing the potential private sector or entrepreneurial opportunities that a licensee might have. My question is this, with regards to what's in the bill. With regards to licensees, is there anything in the bill that restricts a license going to someone who has had participation in the policy-making process, let's put it that way, something that the public might look at? And I know that because you've gone on this roadshow for years, you're concerned about the public confidence in this system. And so is there anything in the bill that would give the public security that, okay, we don't have insiders maneuvering this and that's who's winding up with the licenses?
So as you know, I've committed like 2 years of my life to developing this public policy, and I think you know that I'm as committed to ethical safeguards as much as anyone here in the room. So to the extent that we don't have that in here right now in the way we should, I really very much look forward to working with you on the best ways of accomplishing that.
And Senator, I wanted to give you the chance to answer the question just like that, so thank you for doing that. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Senator Ryder, thank you for honoring your agreement as well, and the positioning of your questioning respecting various entities in the body.
Go West Point, go Army.
That's right, go Army. Obviously, part of Senator Ryder's line of questioning is to prevent duplicative questions from the members. I would just ask various members of the committee. I think Senator Ryder asked a pretty fine line of questioning. If we can ask questions that haven't been answered already. Senator Barrickman for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your indulgence. I want to start by first commending the sponsor, for whom I have certainly worked on some tough issues on, and appreciate that this is another one of those tough ones, but she's been a fair broker in this, and I appreciate that. I do. I think just to make sure, so we're all clear, I'm interested in coming to an agreement on this. And I think that agreement can be struck so long as we balance some of what I perceive to be the public's expectations of how this may become law with some of the priorities that have been expressed in our meetings to date and here to date. So I want to go through some of those priorities and talk about how we might address them. First, I want turn some questions to the Deputy Governor, if I could. I want to, not with the questions that Senator Ryder has raised, but talk about the expungement process from a little different perspective. Mind you, and I think this is nothing new for the three people sitting at the table, but just to be clear, I have very publicly, since before the governor was elected, talked about very publicly my embracing of a taxed and regulated market for this product. And we did, Senator Staines, Representative Cassidy, and I did a lot of work on this last year before the elections and in the year prior. We did joint meetings with editorial boards, and we talked about Senator Staines' opening comments, which is the priority of taxing and regulating this. More recently, much of the discussions this year have talked about this other, what has been identified here as a priority of the governors, that we fix this unjust system, and that the solution to that problem come through an expungement process, which Senator Ryder, I think, appropriately outlined as very controversial. I think that, his explanation of how felons might be treated, some of these more egregious offenses may be treated, I think he's done a good job of outlining the controversy that exists. My question for you, Mr. Mitchell, is more about the process. And I have articulated in our working group meetings my view that the governor has on his own an ability to expunge or pardon these offenses under Article 5, Section 12 of the Illinois Constitution. Do you agree that he has that power?
Sorry, I just want to have you repeat your last sentence again. So the question is about the governor's ability to pardon or to expunge.
The question is, under Article 5, Section 12, I believe the governor has the power to do three things: grant reprieves, commutations, pardons, clemency, is defined by the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. I believe those powers that the governor has under the Constitution allow the governor on his own mm-hmm. to do what is intended by this expungement proposed in the bill. Do you agree with my suggestion that the governor has this power on his own under the Constitution?
I agree with your characterization of the governor's power under the Constitution because you just read it verbatim. I don't know that I agree with your conclusion in that a pardon and an expungement are not the same thing, and this is according to Illinois Supreme Court law in People versus Gleason, I should say. A criminal record is not automatically expunged as a result of a pardon. So I think the goal here, Senator, is to minimize collateral consequences, that being the effect on access to housing, employment, education, et cetera. And the fact that a criminal record could still exist after a pardon by the governor was why the expungement process, which we've used for juveniles and other in the past, was a thought as to the most efficient way to do this. I know that we have some disagreement on that, and I think we're going to work on a solution.
So the clemency that the governor could issue could be used, again, I guess I'm looking for your belief on this. I believe the governor could use his powers. He could issue a clemency order, a mass order. It's been done in the past. Governor Ryan issued a clemency order. That action of Governor Ryan was reviewed by the Illinois Supreme Court. The court found, and actually, just to read, from that court decision, People versus Snyder, the court found there the powers given the governor in Article 5, Section 12 are extremely broad, extremely broad. That's the court's depiction of that. His acts, this is again referencing the governor, his acts in the exercise of the power can be controlled only by his conscience and only by his sense of public duty. I believe that the governor can issue a clemency order here that, with existing laws that allow records to be sealed or expunged, should satisfy the governor's priority here of dealing with the individuals who have these offenses. And that's where I've raised this issue repeatedly in our working groups. I still don't understand why the governor is coming to the legislature here and asking them to do something that he can do on his own.
So I'd say two things here. First of all, it is a priority of the governor's. It's also a priority of multiple caucuses and folks with whom you serve, including the Black and Latino caucus and other members of the Democratic caucus. What I would also say is, again, the feeling, Senator, is that insofar as we can streamline this process, we do sealings, we do expungement. All of those things require significant effort on part of the person, many of whom might be economically disadvantaged. So whatever we can do to streamline it, to spend as little time sort of in the court system as possible in ways that, again, can be difficult to access was the goal. And given that, again, under Illinois Supreme Court law, the legislature can mandate that a court expunge a record, we thought this was the most efficient way to do it. That said, as we've said in our working groups and in our own private discussions, we're very open on other ways to streamline this process, but there is some rationality to the initial proposal here.
And I just want to push back on the streamline suggestion, and you have made that statement privately. Streamlining the process occurs, again, my belief, if the governor takes this action on his own. We live in a state with 102 counties. We've got 102 judicial systems. We've talked about this. We have 102 states' attorneys. The process to handle a mass expungement becomes incredibly convoluted when the legislature orders the court system to do this. Yesterday, the reports were that, some believe that this raises separation of powers issues. My point simply is this. This was not an issue last year. When we did our visits with editorial boards and we talked about how the legislature may come together on taxing and regulating cannabis, we weren't talking about expunging all these records. The reports the other day said there's 800,000 records that could be expunged. I don't know if that's true or not. The point that I think I've repeatedly tried to make is that if this is a priority and the priority is to do it in a way that is streamlined, I believe the most effective and efficient way to do that is for the governor to take that power. Maybe we disagree, but I continue to believe that's a path that should be considered.
Okay. And you've made that clear,
Okay.
Senator, and we've heard that. And I would say as to the discussions about whether expungement was on the table or not before, I was not privy to those discussions between you and Senator Stain or Representative Welter or Representative Cassidy. I would just say it's always been a priority for the governor. I think there are folks of the public in terms of expectation who believe that if you are going to legalize an industry that has disproportionately impacted the lives of folks from disproportionately impacted areas, that doing something to make sure that they can participate and have the scarlet letter removed from their lives is important to a lot of people.
Senator, do you have any questions?
I want to switch to the ROC program. Again, Senator Ryder, I think, addressed a number of questions that I think are asked and answered. My question is this on the ROC program. Again, if this is a priority, why not fund this program through the general budgeting process? Why is it that this program needs to be funded through this rather than the budgeting process?
Well, we're setting up a new revenue stream here in the bill, and we think there's a nexus, I know I certainly do, of you're dealing with now legalizing possession and sale of cannabis, and there has been a huge disparity in the way communities have been treated with regard to arrest and incarceration, specifically around cannabis. There's just a nexus here where you're doing a lot here to try to then sort of be able to address communities that have been devastated by over-incarceration and the war on drugs for decades, as this has been going on, that I think it's only just and fitting that some of the revenue from that, now as we're legalizing and moving that industry out of some of these neighborhoods too, when that was the only employment available in some cases, you got to make sure you're actually now using some of the revenue, I think, to actually enable communities to take steps forward in ways that they believe are most important to them. I think at the community level, it's most clear at the community level what it is they need to actually move forward, whether it's addressing issues of financial literacy, or if it's issues of violence prevention and reduction, whether it's issues of employment and training programs, be in the cannabis industry or something else, that there's self-determination around what's needed that then gets identified and through a competitive grant program applied to with ICJA. It's very similar structure that has existed under the adult redeploy, where ICJA sort of maintains the grant program for it. There's a state level board that helps review applications from the community level.
Right, I think all of those arguments could be made in a budgeting process, is my point. Okay, the concern when that program is not funded through the budget is that that it diminishes the oversight the legislature has in where these dollars are going. Effectively, as proposed, to the extent cannabis revenues are generated year after year, some of those revenues into perpetuity get placed in this fund. So I think there's a legitimate concern there that we all in the legislature should have, that, is that an efficient, is that an effective use of the dollars? Are we getting the programming needs that are desired out of the dollars that are being spent? To me, some of those things are...
Yeah, legitimate questions. I think we have that over all aspects of this. We've heard you. I think we should be looking at maybe doing a touch point, make sure we reevaluate how these dollars are getting allocated, very open to that. But there is reporting built in. It's subject to GATA, the Grant Accountability and Taxpaying Act. We've certainly learned from other programs in the past that have not had strict scrutiny, and there's definitely ongoing requirements for reporting over, and that it has to be based on evidence-based programming. So we do believe we've built that in. If there's more we need to do on that scrutiny, all open to that, and definitely open to looking at touch points to make sure we revisit.
To be clear, the only manner, and I'll wrap it up, Mr. Chairman, I see you. To be clear, the only manner in which the legislature can look at this objectively and say we're not getting the intended result from it is for us to, in the future, change the law to stop it from continuing, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And we can certainly do that also. We do that, make those kinds of changes in BIM bills every year that we do a budget process, but we can always be open to that. But point noted.
Senator, any other questions?
The communities that are identified, we have continually asked that the communities, that we can have a list of the communities that would qualify. We've not yet seen that list. Can we get that?
So at the moment, Senator, you're talking about the disproportionately impacted areas.
Yes.
So I would say two things. One is there is a difference between DIAs and the areas contemplated for ROC. It's slight, but I believe that ROC also contemplates incidents of gun violence in a way that DIAs do not. The Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity is at the moment compiling those areas. So as soon as we have that list, we can get those to you.
We've continually asked that we consider broadening the communities to acknowledge that some communities have been negatively impacted by opioids and the opioid epidemic, and I believe that this would be an appropriate category to be expanded so some communities who've been disproportionately impacted by opioid abuse can also benefit from this program. And I hope that can be considered as well.
So that's noted, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Bergman.
I just wanted to add one more thing, because I do understand, that's a noted point too. I just also want to make sure that we keep clear that the nexus, the people who have been over impacted by the opioid crisis is very different than people who've been over impacted by the war on drugs, the over policing and the over incarceration and the impacts that follow with that. It's a different situation with being overly impacted on the opioid crisis, which is also firmly in that public health category. So I do see overlap, but I just want to make sure that we don't lose the nexus that we're trying to
I think it's just a recognition that we're a large, diverse state who's had some negative impacts from illegal drugs, gun violence, and beyond, that maybe this program can be designed to address.
Thank you, Senator Bergman. Senator Lightfoot for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Not so much a question. I think Senator Hutchinson pretty much answered Senator Bergman a whole lot more eloquently than I was going to do. But I think, Senator, one of the things that you need to acknowledge is social equity is social equity. And I think that every time a situation or opportunity comes to support communities that have been impacted, here's this opportunity to throw other things in there, that there's no correlation. So opioids, having opioids, we receive money for them in the budget, has zero to do with legalizing cannabis and it addressing a specific issue. So I would hope that we don't mix the two, because there is no correlation, and I just wanted to respond to that the best that I could in a polite manner. Thank you.
Senator Lightfoot, thank you very much. Senator Hunter for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Staines, during your presentation, you mentioned a piece about the employers being able to, can you repeat that, please?
Yes, that they can maintain a drug-free workplace is our intent in this, so that they have that ability under the medical cannabis program, and we want to ensure they have that ability under adult use if we go to tax and regulate.
Okay, so how is that enforced today? Because I was thinking about, I know during the hearings that I had, that I was involved in, there were some questions from the audience regarding how are employers enforcing, are they renewing or are they changing their personnel policy to insert in there regarding random testing or something like that, or?
They probably already have those policies in place. I don't know that they would need to change it. We're just enabling them to continue the same policies of enforcement they have around that they currently have.
Okay, because one of my constituents brought to my attention that if he worked in a sensitive position with local government in Chicago, and he said, well, what happens, Senator, if I go home for the weekend, I'm in my home, and I decide to smoke a couple of joints, maybe on a Friday night, and he goes to work Monday, and he's randomly tested. Could he lose his job because he has drugs in his system? Or, something like that. That was one of the questions, and I could not answer that question because the person consumed the drug, although it's legal, in his own private home. And you know how long marijuana stays in your system. It's not like alcohol, you can't.
And just to follow up on Senator Hunter's question, secondary smoke as well, in terms of if you're affected by secondary smoke, how would that affect you as well?
Yeah.
So number one, we know that is a gray area in the fact that we operate right now with a difference between states individually legalizing and what the federal government has done right now. There's a growing body of research and work that's actually happening to talk about, one, the difference between impairment and presence, because it's very different for THC and, say, a methamphetamine or cocaine or something like that. I do think that employment law, as this grows, is going to move into an area that says that the focus needs to be on impairment and its relationship to the job that you're actually doing. But this is something we readily recognize, that because this is happening as a state-by-state thing, there's federal conversations about this, there are state-level conversations about this, but it's not settled law yet. One of the things that all states have done, though, is made it so that employers can still say that they can have a drug-free workplace during the pendency of the job that you're doing. We are watching for what's happening when you're not at work and when you're not doing that job. It's a growing area that is going to have to. It's just growing as we go along. So it's not one that we can definitively answer right now, but we are watching it, and that is a subject of conversation because it does impact when you're not at the job, or if you're doing something for which that impairment doesn't relate to the job that you have to do, in all of those areas. This is a growing part of employment law.
Yeah, but while you're watching, something has to be inserted in this legislation to protect the employers who decide to get high in their own private residence.
Yes, we have a number of, I actually just received yesterday 2 sets of proposed additions to go into this amendment that speak directly to that.
Okay, so another question is, so youth, what age are we talking about? 18 and under cannot?
21.
21, okay. So we know that many of our youth are out here getting high. So by us making it really clear that if you're 21 years old and younger, you cannot legally purchase any kind of marijuana anywhere.
Or
including-
possess, or possess.
Or possess, okay. So would this law create an underground market for youth to
Yeah, I
buy,
mean,
sell,
right now,
grow, and
youth are
use?
buying it on the street. What we've seen
They
in
are,
states that
right.
have legalized is that illicit market decreases significantly. In Colorado, the illicit market's decreased 75%. So it's much more challenging, youth find, to be able to purchase on a legal market because that illegal market is drying up. It just doesn't
But
exist
what
in the
about
same
the
way.
underground market that it is going to create? Because, these kids are going to get high.
I would-
And they are going to figure out how they are going to continue to get there.
I think the approach to this is that the legalization and the public safety parameters that go into legalization does not create a market that already exists. The illegal market and the market that you're describing is already here.
It's
So,
here, yeah.
so in other words, what we're trying to do is tamp down on that. So we're not creating a situation, we can't create a situation that's already there. The way to address that situation is to put barriers in place and public health education in place to make it more and more difficult for that to happen. Very much the same way we handle alcohol and underage drinking right now.
Our officers
Jeff Berkowitz, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel. We're going to take a bit of an in-depth look at the run for the mayor of Chicago. The Illinois Channel, keeping you connected to your state, your issues, your home.